So, um, SOVT, semi-occluded vocal tract exercising or training. We can sort of append whatever we want on the end of it, but the general idea is SOVT. We are narrowing some point, any point, along the vocal tract above the vocal folds. There's various ways you can do this. You can obviously use something like a straw, which is what I call passive SOVT. You can also use active techniques, which are things like the so lip manipulation, tongue manipulation, that kind of thing. So lip trills is an SOVT exercise. Anything that changes the aperture that the air can escape from is an SOVT exercise, because we are partially occluding, we are reducing the amount of space the air can come out of. So the primary focus really is straw work. I think it's the best type of SOVT work, quite simply because you are not actively doing anything. You know, if you're manipulating your lips, manipulating your tongue, you are actively doing something. And so the straw passively gets you working, and it all comes with all kinds of additional benefits that we're going to cover in a second as well. But straw work, I think, is the king of the SOVT domain. So let's just have a quick exploration of what happens as we breathe. So as we are singing, as we are expiring, air is coming from the lungs through and past the vocal folds out of the body. It's a pretty much it's like that. It's unidirectional. And I made this. Oh no, there you go. I made this little animation of very crudely what is happening at the vocal fold level. So we have subglottic pressure building beneath the vocal folds until we reach what we call phonation threshold pressure. Now, phonation threshold pressure is the minimum amount of pressure required to part the vocal folds and begin the oscillation cycle. So once we reach PTP, we part the vocal folds and air flows through in puffs. And this is essentially what pitch is, right? So it's the variance of the oscillation, the variance of the puffs that creates the pitch. And so this is crudely what is happening just generally when we expire. Now, with SOVT, because we are changing the way the air can escape the system, we actually trap quite a bit of the air and acoustic energy, and it has to do something. It's got to go somewhere. And so essentially what happens is it gets reflected back down off of the internal surfaces of the mouth toward the vocal folds, and we create a almost bi-directional pressure system. And so that kind of looks, again, crudely like this. So you have phonation threshold pressure, subglottic pressure building, vocal folds part, air moves through. And as you occlude the system, as you put something in the way, so you restrict the amount of air that can come out, some of that air and acoustic energy gets reflected back, and we reach the vocal folds again. And this provides a lot of benefits in terms of shaping the vocal folds, aligning the vocal folds optimally, and making sure generally that they are working in the most efficient way possible for the singing task. Now, what's quite useful about this, especially about using straws, is we can change fundamental principles of the straw, fundamental ways the straw works, in order to generate more or less back pressure. You can kind of guess what's happening here. If you use a wider diameter straw, a larger straw, you are going to have less back pressure because more air can escape, and thus there is less resistance, etc., etc., etc. If you use a narrower diameter straw, you are reducing more of the space that the air would be coming out of, and so you create a back pressure which gives you more of a SOVT effect. So this is kind of the idea that I want you always to be having mentally, is manipulating what kind of straw, what kind of device you're using will generate different effects for the task that you're doing. And for me, everything is very task specific. We have to really think about the individual singer, what their unique individual voice is capable of, what their vocal tract length and size and all that kind of thing is attuned to, and then we need to select a resistance value or resistance setting that is akin to what they would need for their voice. You also have to then look at task, right? If somebody wants to work on, let's say, the higher notes in a softer, sweeter quality, we're going to be changing fundamentally what resistance values we want and what effect we want than if you wanted to go for something like a stronger, mixier quality, because they rely on different amounts of pressures from the lungs. Phonation threshold pressure changes as pitch increases, and so it's a really you've really got to fine-tune things based on individuality and task, and we'll get there in a minute. But I kind of wanted to just summarize some of the key benefits of SOVT in general, specifically with straws. So the naturally they help you sing with ease. The reason why they help you sing with ease is because you are creating an efficient environment. You are more aerodynamically aligning the vocal folds. You are squaring them up more appropriately for the singing task. And we are balancing out phonation threshold pressure such that you as the singer have to do less to do more, roughly. So they help strengthen your voice. And the way I like to explain this is, if you are aiming to be a bodybuilder, you don't go to the gym and lift the heaviest weight possible on day one. Quite simply, it will not happen. It doesn't work because you haven't got the conditioning in the body, you haven't got the muscle strength required to lift those weights. What you have to do is you have to start with lower, lighter weights across a greater number of repetitions and start to build those up. And as your muscles develop, you can then begin to lift heavier weights. It's exactly the same for the singing task. You want to start with, let's say, a lower resistance SOVT effect. At first, build up some of that core conditioning of the new environment that the vocal folds are met with, the new back pressure reflections of air and acoustic energy. You want to really start to entrain those vocal folds so that when you want to do the harder tasks, like, singing or, belting out a big note or whatever, you have the initial conditioning on the lower resistances that you can then build up into, let's say, a gym-like workout across higher resistances. So this is how it helps you strengthen your voice. You condition based on that gym kind of scenario. It provides a cushion of air, like a protective little bubble in a way, and it's not quite as visual as that. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's a really nice representation of what's going on. You have air coming from the lungs naturally, you have pressure coming from the lungs moving outward of the body, you have a reflection of acoustic energy going the other way because of the back pressure, and so in the middle you're met with this cushiony goodness of pressure. Now again, it isn't quite like that, but the effect that it has is you essentially you buffer the harsh collisions of the vocal folds. So you stop the vocal folds harshly slamming together with each oscillation cycle by having this sort of pressure cushion in the middle there. I said this before, you promote efficient vibration of the vocal folds. This is because of the way you're now shaping the vocal folds. Because of the new pressure systems that you are generating as a result of the back pressure, you are pushing and pulling them into correct alignment, more efficient alignment for the pitches that you are singing across. Gain vocal power without straining. Now, this one is kind of a summary of some of the other effects. You can see how the other effects lead into this. But essentially, if you take the straw away and you work on, let's say, a singing task that has you creating a relatively strong projected sound, some singers might accidentally use, too much air pressure or too much muscle tension, or try and create too much within the body that overpowers the vocal folds, overpowers the system, and then problems arise from there. What you do with SOVT, especially on something like a higher resistance setting, is you passively train those muscles. Just by blowing through the straw on a high resistance setting, these muscles will have to engage as a result of the resistance provided by the device. And so you're not necessarily going to be overworking the system, because the system is working passively to what it needs to be doing anyway for that task. So getting vocal power without straining, you are letting the system do the work for you, helping it along a little bit without completely overpowering it based on your kind of like mental analysis of what you think you might need. Lots of people saying hi, which is cool. Hello, hello, hello. I have the chat on this screen if anybody's kind of like, why are you looking all over the place? Okay, one of the other benefits, and there are a lot more, but I think these 6 are the core ones, are they help you recover tired and fatigued vocal folds. Now, if you think about this, let's say, for instance, you've been doing a show for, week after week after week, let's say 6 days a week, whatever. It's a fairly demanding show. You come off at the end of that show and you're like, I feel a little bit fatigued. My voice feels a little bit lazy, and now it's done all the work that it needs to do, and the muscles, everything just feels like it doesn't want to do anything else. Now, we get that. That is representative of what happens in the gym. You work out in a gym for long enough, your muscles will become fatigued. You will feel tired. Exactly the same at the vocal fold level. So what SOVT does is, because it fundamentally changes the pressure systems at play, the requirements of your physical effort, it then eases the operation of the oscillation. It eases the vocal folds back into a normal speaking mode from, let's say, the higher demanding gym workout-esque task. We're optimally aligning things, we're optimally shaping things, we're optimally making the vocal folds vibrate, and all of those systems allow us to work more efficiently, especially over longer periods of time, and so we kind of elongate the time it takes for the vocal folds to become fatigued anyway. So these are kind of the 6 core benefits of SOVT in general. Now, I define 2 types of SOVT technique when using a straw. The first is pure straw technique, and quite simply, that just uses the straw that you have and the mechanical properties inherent within that straw to generate a resistance. For instance, if you are using a standard kind of UK style drinking straw that's like 5mm in diameter, however long it is, that is a fixed resistance based on the length of that straw and the diameter of that straw. If you are using a 3mm short sort of American cocktail stirring straw, that is a fixed resistance still, but it is a higher resistance than the 5mm standard drinking straw. Now, those properties are unchanged in terms of what the straw offers. Now, there's a consideration to that, and that is obviously the straw that I've been developing, which is variable in length and aperture, but those are still fixed across those variable settings. So that will always be that long with that aperture when you're doing the task that way. If you move it down, that will always be that long with that aperture doing the task that way. If you move it down, it will always be that long with that aperture. So it's still a fixed set of settings, but you just have variability of what fixed set of settings there are. Now, when you use something like water bottle technique or water resistive technique, you are using the properties of the water, of the fluid, to more so define the resistance for you. And this is important because there's a big distinction here between pure straw technique and water resistive technique. Now, essentially, the greater the volume of water for water resistive technique, and the further into that body of water the straw is, the harder the task will be, because you have more water to displace. So, for instance, you can kind of see the water level shaking about there. If I put the straw just at the surface, that is going to be a relatively low resistance, because from here to the surface is not very much distance, and so the air can pretty much easily escape. If I plunge this all the way to the bottom, you now have this entire volume of water that you have to displace before the air can escape the system, which means there is going to be a higher pressure, a higher resistance within that, and you're going to get a stronger workout as a result of it. So those are the 2 fundamental differences between pure straw technique and water resistive technique. So I just want to touch very quickly then on why this is kind of fundamentally important. So with pure straw technique, you can find different lengths and sizes of straw, and you can manipulate those to generate a resistance that works for you, fixed across those mechanical properties. With water bottle technique, that doesn't matter so much. In general, I would say actually you want a lighter resistance default straw, so a wider straw, potentially a slightly shorter straw, but generally wider is better, so that when you put it into the water, you're not doubling up on resistances, basically. You know, if you put a 3mm cocktail straw into the water quite low down, you are going to get an insane amount of resistance that is going to overload the system, because the straw itself comes with a high resistance and you're putting it lower into the water, which is a high resistance anyway. So you really want to balance those things out. You want to find a wider straw for water bottle, or a lower resistance straw for water bottle work, and you want to find, if you're doing pure straw technique, something that works for you and your voice. I'll talk about R's more towards the end, but essentially R's are variable. You can change aperture, you can change length, so you can really define those resistances for pure straw technique and water bottle technique to best suit you. So we're going to dive into some practical stuff. First of all, I think the best thing to do at the moment is to test the sound, is to test that everything is working properly. Some people make mistakes to begin with, in that they produce a hum, a nasal hum, when doing straw work, which isn't correct, because the air isn't coming out of the straw, the sound isn't coming out of the straw, it's coming out of your nose. And so if you are humming through the straw and you pinch your nose and the sound stops, it means you're placing the sound incorrectly. If you pinch your nose and the sound continues, it means you're placing the sound correctly. So if you pinch and unpinch, basically just do this. Sustain a single note out of the water, I think is easier to test this for the moment. So grab a straw and just hum through it. If it stops, if it cuts out intermittently, you are humming, and we don't want to be doing that. Try and think about creating an ooh vowel shaping through the straw, and it should change fundamentally how that works. So you kind of want to go from a to an, and I can feel the air coming out of the straw. This is a good way to check if you don't have water, if you don't want to use water for the moment. Just check that you can feel the air on your hand. And as you're doing that, pinch and unpinch your nose, and you will, hopefully you will not notice a difference. And that's the positioning, that's the general setup that you want to be at. If you feel vibrations at the lips, if you feel vibrations anywhere else, just run with it. Don't get worried for the moment. Vibrations are not a bad thing. They just help you reference what's going on and where. So play about with that then for the next, let's say, 30 seconds. I'm assuming everybody on here has a straw anyway. So play about with that for the next 30 seconds. Hum through the straw, pinch and unpinch your nose. We're not worrying about resistance for the moment. We're going to talk about resistance and how we kind of define that a little bit later on, because it is almost impossible for me to sort of dive in one-to-one with everybody here and work out the best resistance settings for you. So let's just assume you have a comfortable straw, something that doesn't feel like it's gonna explode with pressure, and hum through the straw, pinch and unpinch the nose, and see what you get. You're gonna have until my clock here ticks over. So whilst that is ticking down time, if you have any problems initially with placing that sound, drop a comment for me, and we can very quickly try and problem solve some things as we go along through the next sections. But it should fix it by having an ooh vowel shaping instead, as opposed to a like a general hum. So drop a comment if you are really struggling. The clock has ticked over and we're gonna move on, but drop comments anyway. So we're going to work on some breathing drills. I think SOVT is so versatile because you can do pretty much any kind of singing task with it and train the voice. You can do single notes, you can do breathing work, you can do melodies, you can actually work on the melody of a song that you're struggling with the straw. Obviously you're not going to articulate, but you can get the notes, and you can position the notes in the right place with optimum efficiency, so that when you take the straw away, obviously that task is going to be more attuned as a result of it. So for the moment, breathing drills. This is where people start to really understand the physical requirements of the singing task, because when you add a resistance onto some of these breathing drills, you can really feel what's going on. So for the first on the left here, we're going to work on a few different pattern types. We're going to go a 4 times burst, then a 2 times sustained. In general, we're going to do it 4 times. Then we're going to do 2 times burst, 1 time sustained 4 times. Then we're going to do a 1 times sustained and a 3 times burst 4 times. And we're going to do that whole thing 3 times. Now, we probably won't have time to do all of that today. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, I think the recording of this is going to be posted later anyway, maybe. So you can always sort of reference this. But take a screenshot quickly of these patterns so you can work on these by yourselves. Essentially, what we're doing here is we're going... So 4 times burst, 2 times sustained. You can also do this unvoiced if you find it easier for the moment. You can just go. Depends what level you're working at to begin with. If you're really confident, wow, that is an unnecessary amount of carnage outside with the cars. Good. I don't know if you could hear that beeping, but that was absurd. So yeah, if you're really comfortable with straw work to begin with, jump straight into doing it on a voiced sound. So if you're not comfortable and you're kind of sort of just getting started with straw work, just do it unvoiced for the moment. So it's just breathing. So yes, 4 times, then 2 times sustained. So great. The next one is 2 times sustained, 2 times burst, 1 time sustained. Fundamentally different. You will feel different parts of your body working to generate those bursts of breath. And then we completely flip it around with the last one. We do a 1 time sustained and a 3 times burst. And this one will feel quite a bit different. So we do. So it's ba, 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 on a breath or on a voiced sound. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to play about with this, and I just want you to bounce around some of the bursts, voiced or unvoiced for the moment, and really get a feel for what the body is doing, what the core muscles are doing. Put some comments in with how you're getting on with this, and if you can feel the engagement of those muscles more so than you would have done previously, and if you're starting to feel different systems working than you obviously did previously. So put some comments down below. Have a play about with it for the next minute or so, and then I'm going to talk about moving from voiced to unvoiced and why that's beneficial. Remember to also keep hydrated. Some of these exercises, if we're doing a lot of them in quick succession, might have a tendency to dry things out slightly, just because we're moving air out of the body through in a very particular linear way, and so if things just dry out, just grab some water. How do we start the sound? Is it do? No, not necessarily a do. If you're finding we might have to have a chat after. If you're finding something painful, you shouldn't really feel any kind of pain at all, so you might have to private message me about this. I'm curious to know what kind of straw you're using. If you're using like a insanely high resistance straw, maybe you're overloading the system, but nothing should be painful. You want to start the sound. It's essentially just an ooh. Ooh. It's that sound, just a general ooh through the straw. So you're producing exactly the same shaping and mechanism as you would when you're singing an ooh vowel, realistically, but you're just doing it through the straw. So no, you're not necessarily starting on a do. But yes, can you please let me know roughly what sizing your straw is, and we will chat after, because it should not ever be painful. All right, let's do unvoiced and voiced. So all we're doing here is moving from one to the other. I actually think this one is better with some kind of water. So if you grab some water, place the straw somewhere that's comfortable. It doesn't have to be crazy high resistance. And also, if you have too much water in here, you might be splashing yourself. But just work on doing 4 unvoiced, then 4 voiced. So, I don't know if you can see this. How do I show you what's going on in here? So we're going... So this is unvoiced, and then when you add the voiced is... So, unvoiced, voiced. Unvoiced, voiced. You want to have distinctive... Let me get rid of some of this water from the straw. You want to have distinctive breaks between each. So you don't want to be sustaining the sound. You don't want to be sustaining the airflow and then just chopping it up. You kind of want to have, you know, ooh break, ooh break, ooh break. So you get the start and stop, the onset and offset of the breath as well. These, I think, are fairly simple to be playing about with. So play about with these by yourself for a bit. Really work on just moving across some of these patterns and these drills, and just find the connection to your body within yourself. Okay, I'm in voice rehab, post-coronavirus, working with a speech therapist on these exercises, so different things are hard, but an ooh very quickly is hard. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I could have taken the label off of the bottle. Okay, I'll do that in a minute. Okay, if you're in... Okay, now is a good time to talk about straw sizing a little bit. If you're using SOVT as a rehabilitative technique, you want to be using a lighter resistance. So a wider diameter straw in general is going to be better for you. And I would say, you know, a wider diameter greater than 5 or 6 millimeters, something like a 9 millimeter is quite good. Because this is not going to provide so much resistance that you are overworking the vocal folds too early into your recovery. There's a lot of research out there, a lot of research papers currently indicating that wider diameter for speech language therapy is better. Narrow diameter for more athletic tasks is better. So it might be that you're using a straw that isn't quite the right sizing for where you are in your rehabilitative cycle. So if you can find a wider diameter straw, great. But again, let's properly have a chat after. Now, one of the other aspects, if you hear my chair squeaking, don't get worried. It's just a very broken chair. One of the other exercises that I think is incredible for this is hills and accents. Hills and accents are going to allow you to work essentially subset groups of notes with overlaps that you can then ascend higher or descend lower. You can kind of see this. So an accent is just a series of notes, a series of a few notes with that overlap. You can see that from the graphic. So you've got accent 1, it rises, then accent 2 falls a bit, but never to where accent 1 was, then it rises a bit more. Accent 3 does the same, falls a bit, but never below where accent 2 started, and then rises a bit more. And then a whole collection of those is called a hill. What effect does bubbling of the air have on the back pressure? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If I forget to talk about that, and literally after I've done this, if I forget to talk about that, can you remind me? Bubbling effect, because there is a significant effect. I was kind of going to save it to the end. So let's just work quickly on hills and accents. So it's like revving an engine, basically. You're going to go... So rise up, bring it back down. Rise up a bit more, bring it back down. Rise up a bit more, bring it back down. You can vary how high you go within one hill, and then you can sort of repeat that a few times. You can have different, you know, heights and lengths of hills and accents and things, and you can really play about with how this works for your voice. For me, I kind of like just taking it all the way up taking it all the way back down, and then playing about if I need to on some of the troublesome parts. So everybody just grab your straw. You can do it in water if you want. You can do it outside of the water. Doesn't matter. If you're doing it in water, generally you want to find consistent bubbles. You don't want the bubbles to be erupting everywhere. You want them to be really consistent. Neutral resistance setting for the moment, somewhere that's comfortable, and just play about. You can stop there if you want. You can restart. Stop there if you want. Restart. Stop there if you want, and then do something else. Then restart. If you want, you can combine the two. You can play about with this so much. And what's great here is we're now starting to build progression. So with the first examples that we worked on with just the breathing patterns, you're working on breath independently, then you're applying some pitch to that and working the transition between the two. Then what we're doing with hills and accents is we're taking that concept and we're elongating it across, you know, sections of notes and then taking that higher. You'll notice you get higher when you use the straw because the length of the straw extends the vocal tract externally from the body. So if my straw is this long, this is how much my vocal tract has been extended. If my straw is this long, this is how much my vocal tract has been extended. The reason why that's good is because this allows us to contain more of the resonances within the system before escaping to the outside world. So we essentially recycle more of that acoustic energy. And it also lowers and stabilizes your voice break, which means your voice break occurs over the notes that you are stronger with anyway. And so those higher pitches are freer because you've already transitioned that voice break. And that's all dependent on the length of the straw, which is why, again, I think this is a really cool solution because you can vary that. Now, before we move on to this pattern, let me just address what does bubbling of the air in the water do? What effect does that have? So I know it's 11 o'clock as well. If everybody's cool, I'm just going to run over for a bit because there's only a couple more things that I want to explore today. So, bubbling of air pressure, or bubbling of air in the water, what effect does that have on the back pressure? The easiest way to answer this is to compare it to electricity. We don't have to know crazy amounts in detail of electrical engineering, but everybody is familiar with AC and DC. So alternating current, AC, and direct current, DC. Now, alternating current is basically you have a wave that is going up and then down and then up and then down and then up and then down. DC, direct current, strips off that down and you've just got the up, essentially. And then it filters through that, and then you just have a linear line. So instead of having this wave, you have just a linear flow. So when you're using pure straw technique, when you're just using the straw with nothing else, this is DC. This is direct current, so direct airflow. Air is moving linearly through this with relatively little turbulence. So it's starting one way and going out the other way. It's a nice flow of air. When you put it in water with the bubbling, you have AC, alternating current. And so what happens here is the interaction of the bubbles essentially is going to push and pull these pressures and this air backwards and forwards in more of an oscillation. And so you get a different type of back pressure. Now, I say different type of back pressure. DC, you get a nice steady flow of back pressure. AC, you get kind of waves of back pressure. I am currently actively researching this. I would show you the rig that I've engineered here, but it's a mess right now. But I'm currently researching this, and so I'm doing computer simulations on air moving through the system, and I'm doing real-life hardware simulations of air moving through the straws, and I'm comparing the difference and analysing the effect and what's happening. So that, in principle, is the general difference. you have the bubbles that interact with that, pushing and pulling the air and the back pressure in waves. And then when you don't do it with the water, you just have a steady stream of back pressure. All right, let's work on something a little bit more advanced now, and we're going to add a piano pattern into the mix. So at the moment, we've just worked on breathing, then we've worked on some pitch work, so hills and accents, without any guidance from the piano. But we can also do all of these kind of exercises with a piano and across a range of different patterns as well. Now, different patterns will have different effects. This, I think, is a nice neutral pattern, so everybody can kind of get a feel for what's going on. So... Ooh, misclicked there, or mispressed, and it was a little bit jazzy. So, what we're going to do is... Oh, yes, you're right. Water is a good visual tool for learning. You can see what you're achieving. Absolutely. So, having the water and the bubbles is great for seeing and visualizing the airflow coming out of your body. The reason why I don't exclusively say do water stuff is because sometimes we want a more direct, linear, steady stream of back pressure and different resistances, because the straw in the water does work a little bit differently. For the moment, and just for the basics of this, we're going to say let's just work on something that is comfortable at the moment. And so if you like using with water and that's comfortable, great. If you like using out of water and that's comfortable, great. Just be comfortable for the moment. More advanced stuff will come later. So everybody grab a straw, grab some water if you want, and we're going to create an oo vowel shaping whilst doing a 1-3-5-3-1 pattern. And so it's going to be... I can't play and use a straw at the same time because I like personally supporting the straw by holding it, so I don't create any unnecessary lip or jaw tension by leaving it to rest there by itself. I would advise you hold it as well. So we're gonna do the piano pattern. You're gonna do this as well, and I want you to feel the stretch, feel the new heights that you can reach. And some of you might not get up this high, that's okay. Some of you will, that's also okay. And back down. Misclicked again. It should be easier on the way down. Okay, great. So as you get higher, as we're ascending, it won't be as easier as if we are descending. The reason why is as you get higher, you're weightlifting upwards. You are doing more work to reach the higher notes. As you are coming down off of those notes, you are doing less work. And so that's why it's easier. So even if you can't get higher, by joining back in on the way down, it should be easier and you should be able to feel a lot more of what's going on. So let's just have a quick chat about patterns for a moment and what patterns are good for what. The reason why I've done this is this is just a general, broad line piano pattern that we're going to start relatively neutral, take it up, and then bring it back lower than we started. So there's a couple of comments in here. Had no idea I could reach those notes. Power to the straw. Yeah, exactly. It's because you're stabilizing your break, and so you are able to reach higher notes. It is fantastic for that. Now, just to address some of these, the bubbles are also a visual tool for helping realize if the abdominal support muscles are connecting. Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, using the bubbles and seeing the bubbles is a great visualization tool for all of those connections and for really seeing what's happening with the breath. But it is not the absolute sole go-to for every task because of the back pressure difference, because of the resistance difference, and obviously because you are fundamentally changing some of the other aspects. Like you are, in a way, humidifying the air again using the straw through the water, which isn't a bad thing, but it still changes how things work, and that is not necessarily akin to how you would be singing. You don't have a water vessel that can humidify things as you're singing. So that's why I think selecting which version of this to do based on the task is the most important thing. Is there a reason why you would start exercises from low to high rather than from high to low? Yes. Okay. So I sort of touched on it a bit, but if you take, let's say, a 5-1, this is easier for really training the sweeter, softer, higher notes. So it's easier to train the higher notes by taking descending whilst ascending. If you wanted to generate some bigness in the sound, I would say you want to start maybe you just want to find an ascending pattern. I kind of cover all of this actually. If you're interested in the science and the theory and more of the technique and all of the practical exercises and how you combine all of these things, I have a streaming course on my website, SOVT Singing Technique. It's just over 2.5 hours long, and it kind of explores all of this in depth as opposed to a kind of mishmash of what we've done now. So yes, different tasks require different piano patterns. Different tasks require different size straws, and you can pick and choose and combine all of these different factors based on your individual needs. And so pretty much the last thing I wanted to kind of address here is that straw sizes obviously do make a difference. Now, we have touched on this, but just to recap, the general rule, and this isn't 100% true for everything, but the general, perfect world rule is a narrower aperture equals a greater resistance, and a longer tube equals a greater resistance. So the narrower the aperture, greater resistance. The longer the tube, the greater the resistance. That is the perfect world rule. If you are training athletically, or if you want to train athletically for singing, I would say a higher resistance is better because you are training those muscles more akin to what you would be doing, let's say, comparatively in a gym. If you are recovering and you want to, let's say you are going through vocal rehab, or you have tired and fatigued vocal folds, a lighter resistance is better because then you are not athletically training the system, you are more therapeutically training the system until you get to that stage where you have the strength enough to move into the athletic tasks. So that's kind of the difference there. Now, part of my research has been to really analyze what's going on in terms of the flow of air, so the velocity of air and the air pressures within each configuration of my SOVT straw, and also within configurations of standard SOVT, well, standard straws for the SOVT task. And a lot of this, again, is covered in the supporting material when you buy a straw. But very briefly, you can see from this that blue is low, red is high. So you can see the velocity starts low at the inlet and speeds up at the outlet. And the counter to that is pressure starts high at the inlet and lowers towards the outlet. Now, the important thing to remember is that that separately isn't the defining factor of what resistance you get, but it is a good indicator of what resistances might be available within the chosen straw that you have. Now, I don't expect everybody to have access to these kind of simulation technologies and things, which is why I am doing the work, and I'm going to publish the paper on it. But I just wanted to give you an idea of like I've done the science on this. I kind of know what configurations of straws are best for what tasks. It's just impossible to teach that over a medium like this because it takes a lot of individual one-to-one work, which I guess segues nicely into this section, in that I have a couple of resources available. So obviously the SOVT straw that we have made, variable length with attachments on the end, so you can really pick and choose and switch around and find the best resistance value and setting for you. So if you want to pick one of these up, they are online and shipping worldwide right now. And I think, to me, I personally think this is the best tool for training your voice with SOVT, because you have so many options, you have so much variety and variability, and so you can really be individualized and narrow down to what you want specifically for your unique individual voice. Now, if you wanted to work with me more one-to-one on developing your voice and really kind of go through what I call 6 core sections of SOVT, so things like breath management, working on melodies, working specifically on isolating pitches and notes and that kind of thing using this technique, I have a 6-week program for professional singers that starts in mid-August. And I work one-to-one, so there's only 20 spaces available on the course, and I work one-to-one with the singer to really instill the principles of this technique to boost your vocal development. So these are the 2 core things that we have available, and obviously the 2.5-hour streaming course is on the website as well if you're interested more in the science and the theory of the technique. I'm going to stay around for just a couple of minutes here. If anybody has any sort of burning questions, you can drop them in the chat, and we'll have a chat about them. But yeah, I mean, feel free to email me as well if you have any questions, or booking a session with me. I am kind of obsessed with SOVT at the moment, and so for me, it is a way to work the voice using a very scientifically underpinned method that we know absolutely works. So yes, I love it. So just drop some comments if you have any immediate burning questions. If you want to follow me on Instagram, do that. If you want to check out some of the other stuff, then you can do that as well. The website links are on the screen. If there are no questions, I can't see anything coming in. Oh yes, that is a very good point. I completely forgot about that. You all have discounts to all of this stuff through our affiliation. So definitely check on, I guess, whatever materials were sent out to you with those discount codes. I'm going to guess that we should probably send those out again so you can get discounts and things. We'll have a chat after and we'll make sure that you kind of get that information again, because I don't want you to miss out on those discounts if they are available. Completely forgot about that. All right, I don't see any questions coming in at the moment, so if there are no immediate burning questions, I think here is a good place to end. If there are any questions after we've ended, then obviously feel free to email me at any point, and I will be happy to answer and to troubleshoot any problems you may have with SOVT. And I think also, who was it? Bethany, if you want to shoot me an email, you shouldn't feel pain when doing this. And if you're going through vocal rehab, I just want to make sure that you're kind of along the right lines of the right straw and resistances. So shoot me an email, definitely. Are there any general guidelines for suggesting resistance level for an entire chorus? Is there a difference in resistance requirements between male and female voices? Yeah, okay, this is a slightly complicated question. I would say there is no set definitive resistance level that you can apply to a group of people. It just won't work, because everybody's vocal tract is slightly different in length, slightly different in shaping and sizing, and picking a 3mm straw, a long 3mm straw, for instance, is going to have a different back pressure effect for all of these different vocal types and vocal tract lengths and shapings, simply because of the way the air is interacting through that system. So no, there is not one set definitive this is how it works for everybody. It does not work like that. There are ranges, though. So there are ranges of resistances that we can broadly apply to people. But I think it's far better to take an individualized approach and play about with things. Which is, again, I know I'm kind of like promoting it a bit here, but this is why this is really good, because you can just so easily go, it's a little bit too much. That's better. So you can really play about with it that way. Now, resistance requirements between male and female voices in early development. Yes. Excluding the early development side, there are fundamental differences in female and male, because female vocal tracts, vocal folder lengths, fall into a set sort of predefined range, and so do males in general. We're very much generalizing here. And so in general, females might require a slightly narrower, higher resistance straw than males. And there is currently some good science as to why that is. So if anybody's particularly interested in the science, hit me up. I will send you some links to some papers. But generally, females require a slightly higher resistance than males. Is telescopic to straw not defined by the minimum diameter? No, because this end is 9 millimeters. This end with the attachment is 3 millimeters. When the attachment is off, internally it's 7 millimeters that flares back out to 9 millimeters. And this is why the science of this is actually a little bit more complicated than I've explained here. I've explained kind of the mental model and broad theory of it. But what happens is it's not strictly the aperture that plays the role here. It is the airflow moving through the system, so the velocity of the air that changes, which in turn changes the pressure systems and all kinds of crazy things. When you buy one of these, I've got supporting material that talks about all of this and the science of this. But essentially what you're looking for is the overall pressure drop within the system, as opposed to strictly the pressure at the outlet. Having different size outlets and inlets and things, yes, it changes things, but it is not strictly you are defined by what is in the outlet. That's why we spent like 5 months engineering this. So no, you're not strictly defined by inlet and outlet. I came in late. Can I see the participation again? I'm going to assume so. I think the recording will be available. I don't understand the gym analogy. Do you say by building from low high resistance is akin to starting low weights? Yes, pretty much. So starting, yes. Think about it like a lower weight is more akin to a lower resistance. A heavier weight is akin to a higher resistance. The reason for that is because the lower resistance is going to provide less of a back pressure effect, and it's going to, the vocal folds and the muscles and the intricate, all of the connecting and supporting muscles are going to, in general, be doing slightly less than if you are having a higher resistance. So the higher resistance is more akin to a heavier weight. Again, I cover all of this in some of the training resources that we have if you want to go into like the super science and the depth of things. Yeah, I think that potentially is the last question there, because the rest of this is just comments. So yes, if that is the final thing, I shall wrap it up there, because I got to go and teach again in 7 minutes. But it has been an absolute pleasure to come and talk to you a little bit about SOVT in a kind of very broad, general sense. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I am around at any time, and I will be happy to answer.